15 years behind the wheel and not even a proper goodbye. I'm Raymond Carter, 51 years old, senior driver at High Ale Syndicate Freight, based out of Tulsa, Oklahoma. Started with them back when they had just a few trucks and a whole lot of ambition. Now they're running 28 rigs, partnered with major distributors across the Midwest, and operating under a new manager who doesn't know the meaning of commitment. Ever since High Ale got swallowed up by some big investment firm last spring, I figured changes were in the air. What I didn't expect was to be the first name on their list. The new operations guy, Darren Kelly. Fresh degree, fancy shoes, never once stepped inside a rig, but had plenty to say about numbers. He'd been circling my paycheck like a hawk, throwing around phrases like legacy overhead in every meeting. That morning, I wrapped up a 3-day haul from Denver, arrived on schedule, like always, when Darren called me into his see-through office. The termination papers were already printed out. My replacement, some kid fresh out of driving school, was waiting in the break room. "We need to streamline operations," Darren said, not meeting my eyes. "It's nothing personal, just numbers. Your salary is nearly double what we can pay a new driver." I nodded, didn't argue. Didn't tell him that Thompson Foods had been shipping exclusively with us for 8 years, because I helped their dock manager move his mother's furniture when the nursing home closed. Didn't mention that Western Distributing renewed their contract 3 times, because I always found a way to make their emergency shipments happen, even on holidays. 15 years of perfect safety records, never missed a delivery window. Known every client by name. Severance is 2 weeks. Darren continued pushing the papers across his desk. Company policy. I signed without reading. Handed over my keys. My security badge and my company credit card said, "Thank you for the opportunity," in the parking lot. I sat in my pickup for almost an hour. Not angry, just thinking about the clients who'd become something like friends over the years. About the Christmas cards I got from shipping managers across 6 states about how this Darren didn't understand. That in this business, shipments moved on relationships as much as diesel. My phone buzzed. Text from Bill Thompson. Himself heard what happened. "Those corporate idiots call me." Then another from Jerry at Western. "This true about you leaving. Let's talk before you make any decisions." By the time I pulled out of High Vale's lot, 3 more messages had come in. I didn't answer right away, just drove home and sat on my porch watching the sunset paint the sky orange over the Oklahoma plains. They'd fired a driver, but lost something worth a whole lot more. I started at High Vale, back when it was just old man Jenkins and his son trying to build something. Jenkins taught me everything: how to navigate mountain passes in winter, how to talk to clients, how to solve problems on the road. Without calling in the freight, business isn't about trucks. He'd say it's about trust for 15 years. I'd built that trust 1 mile at a time. Time when the big ice storm hit Kansas City in 2016. I was the one who got the medical supplies through to 3 hospitals when floods washed out the main highway to Wichita. I found the back roads when Thompson Foods needed an emergency shipment of packaging after a warehouse fire. I drove straight through 36 hours to make it happen. My wife Elaine knew the drill. Sometimes I'd be gone for days, but I always came back with stories. Our kids grew up with me on the road half the time, but they never doubted I'd be there for the important stuff. Missed some baseball games, sure, but never a graduation or birthday. When Jenkins sold the company 5 years back, things started changing slowly at first. New policies, more paperwork, less flexibility. The new management kept me on because the clients asked for me by name. Send Raymond. They'd say, "We know it'll get there." If he's driving, Darren arrived 6 months ago, fresh from some big logistics outfit in Chicago, started talking about efficiency metrics and driver rotation. Didn't understand why we let certain clients set their own delivery windows. Couldn't figure out why Thompson Foods got priority treatment. "They're not our biggest account," he'd argue in meetings. No, I'd explain, "but they're our most loyal. Been with us since the beginning." He'd smile, that corporate smile. Loyalty doesn't show up on balance sheets. I noticed the cracks forming, started hearing whispers about rate hikes for our oldest clients. Saw how Darren hired drivers, based on how little they'd work for, not how well they could drive. Watched him cut corners on maintenance 3 weeks ago. I pulled him aside after he chewed out Dave, one of our best mechanics, for wasting time on preventative maintenance. You're going to lose good people. I warned him. Darren laughed. Everyone's replaceable, Harvey. That's business. 101. I didn't argue. Just went back to my roots, checking in with clients, making my deliveries, keeping things running while the foundation cracked beneath us. Little did I know I'd be the first one they decide to replace after sitting on my porch for an hour. I finally checked those messages. Bill Thompson wanted to meet for coffee tomorrow. Jerry from Western Distributing asked if I had plans to drive for another company. Maria at Lakeland Foods just sent a string of angry emojis followed by, "Call me." I went inside, made a pot of coffee, and sat at the kitchen table. Elaine was working late at the hospital. The house felt too quiet. I pulled out my logbooks. 15 years of Roots deliveries, relationships. Hale didn't own those. They'd fired the driver but forgotten about the connections I'd built. My phone rang. It was Jenkins. Must have heard the news through the grapevine. "Damn shame what they're doing to my company," he said, voice gruff with age and anger. "I never should have sold." "You did what you had to do," I said. "Your wife's medical bill." "Still," he cut in, "I built that place on relationships, not spreadsheets. These new boys don't understand the business." After we hung up, I stared at my hands, calloused, weathered from years of driving, loading, problem-solving, 15 years gone with a single signature. The next morning, I met Bill Thompson at Riverside Cafe. He didn't waste time. "I heard what happened," he said, sliding into the booth. "Bunch of idiots. You've personally saved our bacon more times than I can count." "Just doing my job," I said. "No." Bill shook his head. "You did more than your job. Remember when our cooling system failed at the Broken Arrow warehouse? You got that shipment to our backup facility at 2 a.m. in a snowstorm." I shrugged. "Freight doesn't wait for good weather." Bill leaned forward. "We've got a contract with High Vale, but it's got a 30-day termination clause. Who are you driving for next? Because that's where our business is going." I hadn't even thought about next steps yet, but Bill's words planted a seed. By lunchtime, I'd met with Jerry from Weston, who said the same thing by dinner. 3 more clients had reached out with similar messages driving home. I passed H. Hyale's yard, saw my old truck already reassigned to that young driver through the office windows. I could see Darren in a meeting pointing at charts on a screen. That's when it hit me. Darren saw drivers as interchangeable parts, but clients saw us as relationships for 15 years. I'd been the face of H. Highvale to most of our major accounts. I wasn't just a driver. I was their trusted partner. I pulled into my driveway. Mind racing, called my buddy Frank, who'd left Hyale last year to drive for a competitor. What would it take? I asked to start our own outfit. Frank was quiet for a moment. "You serious about this?" "Harvey, never been more serious in my life." "You'd need capital licenses insurance." He started listing, "and clients," I added. "Which I've got." That night Elaine found me at the kitchen table, surrounded by notes and calculations. "What's all this?" she asked. I said slowly, "I'm starting a freight company." 3 days after being fired, I walked back into Hyale's office, not to beg for my job. I was past that, but to collect the personal items from my locker, and talked to a few of the drivers I'd mentored over the years. Darren spotted me in the break room, talking with Doug and Alejandro. 2 drivers who'd started under my guidance. His face darkened as he marched over. "Harvey, this is private property," he said. "You can't just walk in and disrupt operations just collecting my things." I said, holding up my old thermos and the family photo that had been in my locker, and saying goodbye to friends. Darren crossed his arms. "I've heard you've been talking to our clients, so that's what this was about." Word travels fast in the freight business, they called me. I corrected to ask why I wasn't delivering their shipments anymore. "Well, stop it," Darren snapped. "Those are High Vale accounts. Interfering with our client relationships could be construed as tortious interference with business relationships." He pronounced each word like he'd rehearsed it with a lawyer. "Maybe he can't control who calls me," I said, keeping my voice even, "or what decisions they make about their shipping needs." Darren stepped closer. "Listen carefully. Raymond, you signed non-compete and non-solicitation agreements. When you joined H. Highvale, if you try to poach our clients, we'll bury you in legal fees. I hadn't expected this couldn't afford a legal battle, 15 years of loyalty, and now they were threatening to sue me for taking phone calls. Check those agreements, I said, remembering something important. They expired after 10 years. Jenkins made sure of that. Darren's face flushed. He clearly hadn't done his homework. Regardless, he recovered. This is your one warning: stay away from our clients. I nodded, picked up my things, and walked out in the parking lot. Doug and Alejandro caught up with me. He's running this place into the ground, Doug muttered, cutting corners on maintenance, pushing drivers to break hours of service rules. 3 guys quit last week, Alejandro added. Repace them with rookies who will work for peanuts. I'd suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed made my stomach tighten. Not just for the business implications, but for safety. Poorly maintained trucks and overworked drivers were a recipe for disaster. You two be careful, was all I said. Back home, I called Jenkins to ask about those agreements. He confirmed what I remembered. The non-compete and non-solicitation clauses had expired years ago. I never believed in tying people down forever. He explained, good business is built on choice, not force. The next day, I got a certified letter from H. Highvale's lawyers anyway, threatening legal action. If I continued soliciting their clients, pure intimidation. They had no case, but they hoped I wouldn't know that or couldn't afford to fight it. That same afternoon, Bill Thompson called Heil, just tried to raise our rates by 15% with no explanation. He fumed when I mentioned your name. Their sales guy got all squirrely one by one. Similar calls came in high. Vale was scrambling to lock down away expensive, but our clean driving records helped. Even found a decent used truck that would be ready next week. What I hadn't expected was the call from Patty Hale's longtime dispatcher, Raymond. You got a minute? Her voice was hushed, like she was hiding in a bathroom or storage closet. Always Patty. What's going on? It's bad, she said. Right after you left, Darren hired this strategist. He's combing through every deal, checking margins, renegotiating vendor terms, basically trying to trim down costs anywhere he can. She sighed, and I could hear the rustle of documents in the background. But that's not the worst part. They're planning to shut down the Tulsa operation entirely in 6 months. Move everything to Kansas City, where they've got some tax incentive deal. Everyone here is getting laid off. They just don't know it yet. The news hit me like a physical blow. Heil had been a Tulsa fixture for decades. 40, some families depended on those jobs. How sure are you about this? I asked. 100%. I saw the documents myself when I was filing. Darren left them on his desk, real careless. They've already started looking at warehouse space in Kansas City after she hung up. I sat at my empty desk, staring at the wall. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about all the people who'd be blindsided. 6 months from now, Frank arrived with coffee and donuts, excited about the used Peterbilt he'd found at a good price. He stopped short when he saw my face. What happened? I told him what Patty had shared. His expression hardened as I spoke. So all this talk about efficiency and streamlining was just smoke. He said they were planning to dump everyone anyway. Seems that way. Frank sat down, coffee forgotten. We need to think bigger. Harvey, what do you mean if they're shutting down in 6 months anyway? We should be planning to pick up as much of that business as possible, not just a client here and there. All of it. He was right. This wasn't about getting back at Darren or even saving my own career anymore. It was about preserving what Jenkins had built. The relationships, the trust, the jobs. We spent the rest of the day revising our business plan, called our bank contact, about financing for more trucks, researched warehouse space that could serve as a modest terminal by evening. We had the outlines of something much more ambitious than our original 2-truck operation. The next morning, I called Jenkins and asked him to meet me for lunch. I laid out everything what Patty had told me, what Frank and I were planning, the challenges we faced. The old man listened quietly, hands folded on the table when I finished. He nodded. Once, how much do you need? He asked. Sir, for startup capital. I've got some money set aside, was saving it for a fishing boat. But this seems more important. I hadn't expected this. We couldn't ask you to. You're not asking Jenkins. Cut me off. I'm offering those people at H. Highvale. Most of them I hired myself, known their families for years. I'll be damned if I'll sit by while some corporate vulture scatter them to the wind. He pulled out his checkbook right there in the restaurant. Let's build something right this time, he said, something that lasts. Over the next 2 weeks, Carter Reynolds and Jenkins Freight took shape with startling speed. Jenkins' investment combined with our own resources, and a business loan gave us enough capital to lease 5 trucks, secure a small terminal with a warehouse, and hire key personnel. We started with the essentials. Patty gave notice at H. Highvale and joined us as dispatcher. 2 experienced mechanics followed sick of H. Highvale's corner cutting on maintenance. We hired 5 drivers, all veterans with stellar safety records who had either already left Hyle or were planning to. The trucks arrived 3 Peterbilts and 2 Kenworths. Nothing fancy, but solid, reliable machines. We painted them midnight blue with silver trim. Our new company logo on the doors each morning. I'd arrive at our modest terminal before dawn and feel a surge of pride seeing those trucks lined up ready to roll. Meanwhile, Highvale was spiraling after I left. 3 major clients had pulled their business not to us, not yet, but to competitors. They'd cited service concerns, but really they were just waiting to see if our new operation could handle their needs. Word of the Kansas City move had leaked. Morale at Highvale was rock bottom. Drivers were jumping ship. Weekly deliveries were being missed. Darren was in full panic mode, slashing rates to keep clients while cutting corners. Everywhere else we moved carefully, building our infrastructure before taking on too much business. Jenkins insisted on doing things right. Proper training, thorough maintenance protocols, fair pay scales. The money will follow if we focus on quality, he kept saying. By the 3rd week, we were ready to approach clients directly. I started with Thompson Foods, my longest relationship. Bill Thompson met me in his office, examined our rate sheets, insurance certificates, and driver qualifications, asked tough questions about capacity and contingency plans. This all looks solid, Raymond, he said. Finally, but H. Highvale just dropped their rates below yours. They're desperate to keep us. They can't sustain those rates, I replied, and they can't match our service. Plus, there's something you should know. I told him about the Kansas City move. Bill's face darkened, so all their promises about local service and quick response times will be impossible to keep once they relocate. Bill nodded slowly. We'll need to phase this transition carefully. Can't afford any supply chain disruptions. We've got a plan for that, I assured him, outlining our gradual implementation strategy. By the end of the meeting, we had a handshake deal. Thompson Foods would move 20% of their shipping to us immediately, with the rest transitioning over 60 days. Similar conversations played out with Western Distributing, Lakeland Foods, and 6 other major clients. Not all signed immediately, but most started shifting portions of their business our way. We weren't just taking clients, we were taking the good people too every week. Another Highvale employee would approach us looking for work. We couldn't hire them all, but we took the best experienced dispatchers, skilled mechanics, reliable drivers. Then came the moment that confirmed we were on the right path. Doug, the driver I'd mentored, who was still at H. Highvale, called one evening. Harvey, you won't believe this. Darren just announced they lost the Cornerstone Builder account. Cornerstone was H. Highvale's biggest client, 30% of their business. What happened? Word is, they found out about the Kansas City move from one of their contacts at Western. They've already signed with someone else. I asked the obvious question. Who they sign with? Doug laughed. That's the best part. Not you guys, they went with National Logistics. Darren's been running around screaming that you somehow engineered it, but everyone knows it's his own fault. The plan was working better than we'd hoped. We didn't need to actively poach all of H. Highvale's business. The company was imploding on its own. 2 months after being fired, I was back behind the wheel delivering a critical shipment to Thompson Foods. Their main production line had suffered a breakdown, and they needed replacement parts by morning, just like old times. Except now, the truck I drove had my name on the door as I backed up to Thompson's loading dock at 4 a.m. Bill himself was waiting, despite the early hour. "You're a lifesaver, Raymond," he said, as I handed him the manifest. "Our production manager says we can be back online within 2 hours." Now I helped unload, then joined Bill in his office for coffee. He seemed distracted, checking his phone repeatedly. "Everything okay?" I asked, just waiting for confirmation on something, he said, pouring more coffee. "Should be any minute now." His phone buzzed. He read the message, then smiled. "It's official. As of this morning, we've terminated our contract with High Vale. You're now handling 100% of our freight." I knew this was coming. We'd been gradually taking on more of their business, but hearing it formalized still felt momentous. "Appreciate your trust," I said simply. "Trust is why you got it," Bill replied. "But you should know you're not the only one, Western. Distributing cut ties with them yesterday. Lakeland Foods the day before. From what I hear, Heil has lost 80% of their Tulsa business in the last 6 weeks. On the drive back to our terminal, I passed Heil's yard. The lot was half empty. A for lease sign had appeared on the fence through the office window. I could see Darren on the phone, gesturing frantically. I didn't feel the satisfaction I'd expected, just a quiet sense that things were working out as they should. We hadn't stolen anything, we'd simply built something better. Something based on the values that had always mattered in this business. Back at our terminal, Jenkins met me in the break room. "Have you heard?" he asked, about H. Highvale losing most of their clients. Yeah, Jenkins shook his head. "More than that, they're declaring bankruptcy effective." Immediately, 6 months after being fired from H. Highvale, I stood in the yard of Carter Reynolds and Jenkins Freight, watching our fleet, now 15 trucks strong, head out. For the day's deliveries, our small terminal had expanded to include a proper warehouse and maintenance facility. We employed 32 people, most of them former H. Highvale workers. Heil Syndicate Freight no longer existed after the bankruptcy. Their assets had been liquidated, their contracts scattered to various competitors. We'd acquired 3 of their trucks at auction, good machines that had been poorly maintained. Our mechanics had spent weeks getting them back into proper shape. Darren had left town last. I heard he'd taken a position with a logistics firm in Phoenix. The investment group that had bought High Vale from Jenkins had written off the entire venture as a loss. Jenkins joined me in the yard, leaning on his cane. At 73, he wasn't actively managing day-to-day operations, but he came by most mornings to have coffee with the drivers and share his wisdom. "Never thought I'd be back in the freight business," he mused, watching a Peterbilt pull out loaded with industrial equipment bound for Kansas City. "You having second thoughts?" I asked. He smirked, shaking his head. "Not even close. Feels like I found my rhythm again." Inside, Patty was finalizing route sheets, phones ringing, people moving with focus. Frank stood by the bay doors, showing new hires how to log inspection reports. Energy buzzed through the air, steady and familiar. "You want to know why this place clicks?" Janine said, topping off his coffee. "It's not just logistics, it's trust, teamwork, knowing someone's got your back." He was right. This wasn't just a company, it was a second shot at doing things right. Later that day, I shut my phone off, took Elaine out for ice cream, and watched the sunset from the hood of the truck. "You good?" she asked. I smiled. Better than good. Sometimes, coming full circle isn't about going back. It's about finally feeling at home.